Welcome to Daily English Flow. Stay until the end for a special bonus tip. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
This is the brief on mastering A2 English grammar. We're going to see how this masterclass turns language learning from a messy pile of vocabulary into a rock-solid structure by treating grammar as a totally practical, hands-on building tool. First, you need a blueprint. If vocabulary is a pile of bricks, grammar is the blueprint showing exactly where they go. The foundation here is the Golden Rule of English word order, Subject-Verb-Object, or SVO. If you put the object before the verb, like saying, "coffee I drink," you literally sound like Yoda. So, why do we obsess over new words when the sequence is what actually creates meaning? Second, we need the invisible mortar to hold it all together. Beginners usually listen for heavy nouns, right? But now we have to hunt for tiny, fast, grammar glue words, like contractions or auxiliary verbs like do and did. So what happens if you miss a swallowed word like didn't because it just sounds like dingo? Well, you miss the negative marker and completely misunderstand the entire reality of the sentence. Finally, let's bring in the pre-assembled materials. Since we know the blueprint and can hear the glue, how do we build sentences quickly without translating word for word? We use grammar chunks, which are pre-built templates like I am looking for, and grammar partners, which are words that just have to stick together, like listen to. Think of words as social creatures that demand specific companions. Using these chunks lets us completely bypass that slow, stressful mental translation process. Ultimately, perfect, pre-built sentences, and not just isolated vocabulary, are the true foundation of fluent, effortless communication.
Have you ever tried to speak English and, well, the words just came out in completely the wrong order? It is incredibly frustrating, isn't it? You translate a sentence absolutely perfectly in your head from your native language, only to say it out loud and immediately be told, yeah, we don't really say it like that in English. If you're nodding your head right now, you are in exactly the right place.
Because here is the brutal truth about language learning, and this quote literally hits the nail on the head. Vocabulary is just a pile of bricks. You can have 1,000 bricks, but without a blueprint, you just have a messy pile of rubble. Having all those basic A1 words is great, for sure, but to actually communicate effectively, you desperately need grammar to act as your structural blueprint.
So, welcome to this explainer, the A2 Grammar Masterclass. Today, we're definitely not going to just memorize boring, abstract rules that you'll completely forget by tomorrow. No way. We're treating grammar as a practical, hands-on building tool. So, go ahead and grab your notebook, put on your metaphorical builder's helmet, and let's get ready to construct some incredibly strong English.
Okay, let's dive into this construction plan. We'll be looking at 1. The grammar blueprint. 2. Input, ears and eyes. 3. Output, mouth and pen. 4. Perfect vocabulary partnerships. And finally, 5. The 4 grammar pillars. Let's start with Section 1, the grammar blueprint.
At the A2 level, you already have the bricks, right? You know the basic words for things like water, train, or hospital. But grammar? Well, grammar isn't some kind of textbook punishment. It's actually the invisible skeleton that holds your words together. It's what turns a confusing mess of vocabulary into a clear, powerful message. Basically, it's the framework that allows you to be instantly understood.
Moving on to Section 2, input, ears and eyes.
There is a massive difference between A1 and A2 listening. An A1 learner usually just listens for heavy nouns, maybe just hearing something like, eat breakfast. But an A2 learner, they have to catch the tiny grammar glue. They hear, did you eat breakfast? That tiny little word did literally acts as an alarm bell for your brain, instantly signaling, hey, this is a question about the past.
To really master this, you can rely on 3 key strategies. Kick things off with an auxiliary hunt. Just tap your finger every single time you hear helper verbs like do or did. Next up, you need contraction detection. Native speakers love to swallow words, saying I'm instead of I am, or kind of slurring didn't go. You've got to write down the full versions to bridge that gap. And finally, listen for the question tone. If someone's voice goes up at the end of a sentence, it's very likely a yes-no question. Okay, now for the eyes. English demands a very, very strict word order, which brings us to the golden rule of reading SVO, Subject-Verb-Object. The dog chased the cat. The actor comes first, the action second, and the receiver third. If you mess this up and say something like, coffee I drink, well, you are going to sound exactly like Yoda. So, to master this reading rule, try sentence dissection.
Grab some colored highlighters, maybe yellow for the subject, green for the verb, pink for the object. Then go on a time marker hunt. Look for words like yesterday or often so you understand exactly why a specific tense was chosen. Finally, and this is my absolute favorite, copy work. Physically writing out simple texts while speaking that SVO structure out loud, it literally burns the correct order right into your brain.
All right, Section 3, Output, Mouth and Pen.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the shift away from word-by-word translation. Translating word for word is just slow and incredibly stressful. Instead, we want to use grammar chunks. You don't build a sentence from scratch every time. You load up a pre-built template, something like, I am looking for, and then you just plug in your noun, like my keys. Boom, instant accuracy.
Here is your daily practice routine. First, try the skeleton drill by writing down a chunk like I want to and just plugging in 5 different words each day. Next, use the echo technique. Basically, repeat native sentences perfectly out loud, but change just one little detail. And crucially, use the 3-second pause. Take a breath before answering a question. Just pause. It lets you load your grammar chunk first, and then the vocabulary will naturally follow.
Let's look at writing for a second. At the A2 level, writing is essentially your laboratory. It is where you put your sentences under a microscope. Now, your goal here isn't to write long, complex paragraphs. Your one and only goal is to slow down and build short, simple, and perfect sentences. We're getting rid of those messy, run-on sentences for good.
To do this, apply the one idea rule. This ensures you're actually using full stops instead of endlessly rambling with and, but, or because. Run your sentences through a strict grammar checklist to verify your subject, your verb, the tense, and your punctuation. Then, actively flex those grammar muscles with the transformation drill. Take a simple sentence like, she plays tennis, and actively flip it. Change it to, does she play tennis? Or, she does not play tennis.
On to Section 4, Perfect Vocabulary Partnerships.
And this brilliantly illustrates a key point. Words are social creatures. They come with mandatory grammar partners. For example, you don't just listen music, you listen to music. You aren't good in sports, you're good at sports. Learning these as a single, fixed unit prevents those awkward mistakes and stops broken sentences before they even happen.
So how do we actually lock these in? Use what we call a preposition hook. Whenever you write down a new word, underline its partner immediately. Practice the partner swap by taking a chunk like I am waiting for and swapping the noun at the very end to reinforce the structure. And finally, be ruthless about it. Conduct a mistake audit. Create a personal blacklist for common errors, like saying, I am agree, and confidently cross it out for the correct version, I agree. And that brings us to Section 5, the 4 grammar pillars. Mastering these final 4 pillars gives you the power to build, honestly, 90% of the sentences you'll ever need for daily life, travel, and work. Pillar 1 is our old friend, the SVO rule. The actor first, action second, receiver third. Sarah eats an apple. Never hide the subject, and seriously, never put the object before the verb if you want to be instantly understood.
Pillar 2 is the tense trio. You really only need 3 main tenses to survive at the A2 level. Present simple for routines and facts, like I work. Present continuous for right now, I am working. And past simple for finished actions, I worked. Learn the specific time markers for these 3, and you are totally set.
So, the crucial point is how you manipulate those sentences, which is exactly where pillars 3 and 4 come in. Pillar 3 is the QUASM formula for perfect questions. Question word, auxiliary, subject, main verb. For example, where do you live? And pillar 4 is your negative shield. You use an auxiliary plus not, and that protects the main verb, keeping it in its base form. So it's always, I didn't go, and absolutely never, I didn't went.
This brings us to the ultimate grammar lab exercise. Take a single verb, just one, like play, and run it through all 4 pillars. SVO, he plays. Tense trio, he played. QUASM, did he play? Negative shield, he didn't play. I promise you, doing this daily builds an absolutely unbreakable grammar foundation. Which brings us to our final question for you today. How will you start building your English house today? Remember, grammar is not a cage, it's a toolkit. Load up those grammar chunks, master the 4 pillars, and turn that messy pile of vocabulary bricks into a beautiful, sturdy house. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Have you ever, had this happen to you? You're standing there, you're getting ready to speak English, and you have the sentence just completely mapped out in your head.
Oh yeah, you've translated it perfectly from your native language.
Right. You've checked the verbs, you found the nouns. It makes total logical sense, right? But then you open your mouth, you say it out loud, and the person you're talking to gives you that slight confused tilt of the head and says, yeah, we don't really say it like that.
Oh, the head tilt.
Hey.
It is a universally frustrating experience for anyone learning a language. I mean, you followed every rule you were taught.
Yeah, you did everything right.
Exactly. You used the right vocabulary, but the end result still just felt entirely foreign to a native speaker.
Yeah.
That head tilt is the exact moment you realize that just knowing the words isn't enough.
And that head tilt is exactly what we are tackling in this deep dive today. We're looking at this really fascinating A2 Grammar Masterclass guide, and our mission here is to fundamentally change how you view English grammar.
Because, let's be honest, most of us grew up viewing grammar as this, incredibly dry, boring list of abstract rules.
It's miserable. Memorizing rules for a test and then immediately forgetting them.
Exactly. But the source material we're looking at today basically asks you to throw that entire mindset away. Instead, we're going to treat grammar as a highly practical, hands-on tool.
And to do that, the guide uses this metaphor that I think completely shifts your perspective. It says, think about your vocabulary, like all those individual words you've spent hours memorizing, just think of them as a pile of bricks.
A massive, heavy pile of bricks.
All right.
And, if you jump 1,000 bricks onto an empty lot, you don't have a house. You just have a messy pile of rubble. It isn't functional at all.
No, you can't live in a pile of bricks.
Right, so grammar is the blueprint. It's the invisible structural skeleton that tells you where every single brick needs to go to build a strong, weatherproof house. It's really the only way to turn that confusing mess of vocabulary into a clear, powerful message.
And this guide is specifically targeting the A2 level of language learning, which, is a really interesting transition phase. For you, the listener, this means you probably already have a decent pile of bricks.
Yeah, you know the basic nouns, you know a handful of verbs, you can probably order a coffee.
Exactly. But now you need to know how to actually build the walls and the roof so the whole structure doesn't just collapse when you try to have a real conversation.
Because at the absolute beginner stage, the A1 level, your only job is collecting materials. You're just trying to survive.
Right.
But moving to A2 means you have to connect this structural blueprint to all 6 core language skills. So that's listening, speaking, reading, writing, vocabulary, and grammar. You have to integrate them.
And that's the only way to transition from just, surviving in a language to actually communicating your true thoughts. So before we can grab our hard hats and start building this house, we need to know how to read the blueprint, right?
Exactly. We need to identify our materials.
And that starts with input, specifically how we consume English. So let's look at the first major shift, which revolves entirely around listening.
So when you're a beginner, you tend to listen for what we can call the heavy words, the main nouns.
Like the most obvious words in the sentence.
Right. If you're in an airport or a restaurant, you're scanning the audio landscape for words like, water or hospital, train, baggage.
Yeah.
You're grabbing onto the main subject and relying heavily on the physical context to guess what the person means.
It's purely survival mode. You hear train and late, and your brain just fills in the rest.
Exactly. But to level up your listening, you have to train your ears to hear something much, much more subtle. The guide calls it the grammar glue.
Grammar glue, I like that.
Yeah, these are the fast, tiny, almost invisible structural words that native speakers just completely crush together. We're talking about auxiliary verbs like do, does, and did.
Right.
And we're talking about prepositions and contractions like I'm, don't, or didn't.
There's actually a scenario in the source material that paints a perfect picture of this. So imagine a native speaker walks up to you and asks, did you eat breakfast?
Okay, classic question.
Right. But a beginner's ear filters out the noise and just hears, eat breakfast. They only caught the heavy words, so they might just nod and say yes. But an A2 learner's ear catches this little alarm bell at the front of the sentence. They hear that microscopic DD.
Yeah, and that tiny fleeting did at the very beginning is actually the most important part of the sentence. It instantly tells your brain, hey, this is a question, and it is firmly planted in the past.
Wow, yeah. So if you miss the grammar glue, you're entirely relying on guesswork.
Exactly. And the swallowed negative is another notorious trap here. Like when someone casually says, I didn't go to work, Native speakers often swallow the didn't, so it sounds almost like didn't go.
Didn't go to work.
Yeah.
We do say it exactly like that.
Right. And if your ear isn't tuned to catch that subtle negative marker, you'll walk away thinking they went to work when they actually stayed home sick. You've completely misunderstood reality.
Which is why relying on heavy words eventually just fails you. So to fix this, you have to actively train your ear, right?
Yes. And one tactical method the guide suggests is going on an auxiliary hunt.
An auxiliary hunt, how does that work?
You take a slow, beginner-level audio dialogue, and you just completely ignore the story. Stop trying to understand what the characters are even talking about.
Wait, really? Just ignore the meaning entirely?
Entirely. Your only mission is to listen for the helper verbs. Every time you hear do, does, did, will, or can, you physically tap your finger on the table.
Oh, I love the tactile nature of that. It forces you to physically acknowledge the structure. It actually reminds me of listening to a really complex piece of music.
No, how so?
Well, when you first hear a song, you really only notice the vocal melody, right? But if you focus, you can tune your ear to hear just the bass line. Listening for the grammar glue is like listening to the bass line. It takes intense focus at first, but once you lock onto that rhythm section, you realize it's actually dictating the entire track.
That analogy hits the nail right on the head. You are tuning your brain's frequency to the underlying structure. And, another way to force this frequency shift is by hunting for contractions.
Right, because we mash everything together.
Exactly. Native speakers rarely enunciate I do not know. They compress it into I don't know. So to bridge the gap between that messy, fast-spoken English and the clean grammar rules in your head, you can listen to short dialogues and physically write down the full, uncompressed version of what you hear.
So if the audio says, she's working, I pause the track and physically write out she is working. I'm basically unpacking the suitcase they just shoved at me.
Yes. You're forcing your brain to recognize that she's isn't a new vocabulary word. It's a structural compression. And speaking of structure, we also have to listen for the melody of the grammar itself. In English, pitch actually tells a structural story.
The question tone, right.
Yes. If someone's voice drifts up at the end of a sentence, they're usually asking a yes-no question. But if the pitch drops down at the end, it's either a definitive statement or a yes question, like who, what, where, when, or why.
So you're literally listening to the music of the language, not just reading the dictionary definitions of the sounds.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're tuning our ears to the blueprint, but consuming language is only half the battle, right? What happens when we look at the words on a page?
Right. The source material transitions here into the A2 reading shift, which is entirely about visualizing word order, because English is notoriously strict about word order.
Yeah, unlike a lot of other languages.
Exactly. In a lot of other languages, you can shuffle words around fairly freely, and the sentence still makes perfect sense, because the endings of the words change to indicate who's doing what. English does not have that luxury. It relies almost entirely on a rigid sequence to create meaning.
I've always wondered about that. Why is English so inflexible with its structure compared to, say, I don't know, Russian or Latin?
Well, it comes down to history. Old English actually used to have those complex word endings, which are called cases. But over centuries of evolution, Viking invasions, the influence of French English shed almost all of those endings.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, so without those little markers on the words tells who's the subject and who's the object, the language just had to adopt a strict positional system so people could actually understand each other.
That makes so much sense. It's compensating for the lost word endings. And the guide calls this strict positional system the Golden Rule of English, right? SVO, subject, verb, object.
It is the absolute bedrock of the language. The actor must come first, the action comes second, and the receiver of the action comes third. The dog chased the cat.
And the guide has this hilarious way of illustrating what happens when you break this rule. If you mess up the SVO order, you end up sounding exactly like Yoda from Star Wars.
Yes, it's the perfect example.
Like if you try to say, I drink coffee, but you flip the blueprint and say, coffee I drink, you've completely shattered the structure. I mean, everyone will still understand you, but it sounds incredibly strange to a native ear.
Because the blueprint is backward. So to stop doing this, you have to train your eyes to see the SVO pattern automatically. And one brilliant method they suggest is taking a simple text and using 3 highlighters.
Oh, color coding.
Exactly. You color code the anatomy of the sentence. So yellow for the subject, green for the verb, and pink for the object.
You're physically dissecting the text to force your brain to acknowledge the pattern. That's great. And you can do the same thing for tenses, right? The guide talks about hunting for time markers.
Yeah, because tenses rarely appear out of nowhere. They're usually heralded by specific time words. So if you read the word usually, your brain should immediately anticipate the present simple tense, because usually implies a routine.
Right. And if I see the word currently, I know I'm about to see a present continuous verb. Or if I spot last week, I'm securely in the past simple.
Exactly. Circling those time words when you read helps you understand the logic of the sentence.
Yeah.
It basically explains why the verb looks the way it does. And if you want to take this visualization a step further, the guide recommends a practice called copy work.
Copy work.
Yeah, you take a basic, well-written text and copy it by hand into a notebook. But here's the trick. As you write, you speak the structural anatomy out loud.
So as I write, the dog chased the cat, I literally say out loud, subject-verb-object.
Precisely.
Ugh.
Taking a physical pen to paper while vocalizing the structure creates a multi-sensory memory. It really cements what correct English looks, sounds, and feels like.
Okay, so we have our listening and reading strategies locked in. We can perceive the blueprint, but now we have to look a bit closer at the actual bricks we're using to build. The vocabulary.
Right, because a pile of bricks isn't uniform.
No, it turns out you can't just slap any two random bricks together with mortar and expect them to hold. Words have secret social lives.
That's a great way to put it. At the early stages of learning, you tend to memorize vocabulary as isolated islands. You learn the word listen. You learn the word wait. But to communicate effectively, you have to understand the concept of collocation.
Collocation, okay.
Yeah, it basically means words have incredibly specific grammatical partners. They like to hang out with certain prepositions and completely reject others.
And this is exactly where direct translation from your native language becomes dangerous, right? If you translate a phrase word for word, you will almost certainly pick the wrong partner in English.
It happens all the time. Like in English, you listen to O music. Don't just listen to music. You wait F for the bus. You belong to O, a club.
And adjectives are just as picky. Like, you are good at sports. You are never good in sports. You're interested in history, and you are afraid of spiders. I mean, it feels arbitrary, but it's totally non-negotiable.
It really is. If you spend an hour memorizing the word listen, but you fail to memorize the word to alongside it, you are basically guaranteeing they'll build a broken sentence later. They have to be treated as a package deal.
So to really ingrain this, you should never write a new verb or adjective in your vocabulary notebook by itself. You always write it and underline it with its partner preposition. You just treat it as a single chunk of vocabulary.
Exactly. And once you have that chunk, you can play with it. You use what they call the partner swap. You keep the partner structure, say, I am waiting for, and you practice swapping out the final variable. I am waiting for the train. I am waiting for my boss. I am waiting for the weekend.
Okay, so you're getting comfortable with the fixed partnership while swapping out the furniture. I like that. Now, the guide suggests a third vocabulary strategy that I actually want to push back on a little bit.
Oh, really? Which one?
They call it the mistake audit, where you're supposed to create a personal blacklist for your most common errors. So, for example, if you always accidentally say, I am agree, instead of I agree, you put it on the blacklist.
Right.
But, I mean, doesn't keeping a literal written record of your failures just make you incredibly self-conscious and anxious when you try to speak?
Okay, it is a fair point. Language anxiety is very real, but you have to shift how you view the list. Think the blacklist not as a report card of your failures, but as a VIP bouncer standing at the door of your mouth.
A bouncer?
Yeah. When you have a mistake you make repeatedly, like saying I am boring instead of I am bored, your brain has essentially built a superhighway to the wrong destination. You're just running on autopilot.
Oh, I see.
So by actively auditing that mistake and reviewing your blacklist before you speak, you interrupt that autopilot. The bouncer steps in and stops the incorrect phrase from leaving your mouth. In the long run, it actually drastically reduces your anxiety because you don't have to wonder, wait, did I just mess that up? The bouncer already did the quality control.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. You're shining a spotlight on the unconscious habit so you can finally dismantle it. Okay, so we have our partner materials and we can read the blueprint. It is time to transition to output. We are going to actually construct the house out loud and on paper. Let's dig into the A2 speaking shift.
Well, the absolute biggest enemy of fluent speaking is the habit of word-by-word translation.
Oh, it is agonizing. We've all been there. You think of the first word in your native language, you translate it. You think of the second word, you translate it. And then you try to mentally glue them together with grammar rules while the person across from you is just staring at you, waiting.
It causes a massive cognitive overload. It's stressful, it's slow, And because of how different languages structure their sentences, it almost always produces broken English.
So what's the cure?
The only way to cure this is by automating your speech using grammar chunks.
Grammar chunks. So these are basically like prefabricated walls for our house, like sentence templates.
Yes. Instead of panicking in real time about how to formulate a negative past tense sentence, you simply memorize a core chunk, like, I didn't know there, or I didn't have time to. The difficult structural skeleton is already built for you. All you have to do is plug in the vocabulary at the end.
Okay, and one way to build this muscle memory is by doing a skeleton drill, right? Writing 5 basic skeletons on index cards. Simple things like, I want to, or do you know? And every morning you read the card out loud and plug 5 different words into it. I want to eat, I want to sleep, I want to leave.
Exactly. You are training your mouth to physically produce the grammar without your brain having to calculate the rules every single time.
I actually use a similar method with podcasts, which the guide calls the echo technique.
Oh, you do? How does that work for you?
Well, when I'm listening to audio and I hear a grammatically perfect sentence, I'll pause it and echo it out loud exactly as the speaker said it. But to make it my own, I change one single detail.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, so if the speaker says, she has been to Spain, I repeat, she has been to Spain. And then I immediately say, she's been to France. You know, you borrow their perfect grammar chunk, but you take ownership of it.
That is a brilliant way to internalize native-level phrasing. Now, to utilize these chunks in a real conversation, the guide recommends utilizing the 3-second pause. When someone asks you a question, you pause for a full 3 seconds before you begin your answer.
Okay, I have to challenge this one too. I mean, in the middle of a bustling coffee shop or a business meeting, a 3-second silence feels like an absolute eternity. Won't people think you've just frozen or that you're ignoring them?
It absolutely feels like an eternity internally because, your adrenaline is pumping. But to the person looking at you, it just looks like you're thoughtfully considering their question. And this touches on a core philosophy of language learning. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is smoothness.
Smoothness over speed. I really like that.
Right. A calm, deliberate pause where your brain retrieves the correct grammatical chunk is infinitely better than panic speaking.
Panic speaking is the worst.
It really is. When you panic speak, you stutter. You realize you're using the wrong tense. You have to stop, rewind, and restart your sentence 3 times. That is so much more awkward than a thoughtful pause. You use those 3 seconds to load the structural chunk, not the vocabulary. Once the blueprint is loaded, the bricks will naturally find their place.
You're pausing to fetch the blueprint. Okay, so what about writing? The guide describes the writing process as the laboratory.
Yeah, because speaking happens on the fly. You're building in real time under pressure. But writing is where you get to slow down. You put your grammar under a microscope in a highly controlled environment.
And the goal in this laboratory isn't to write a sweeping, complex, beautiful essay, right? At the A2 level, the goal is simply to construct perfect, simple sentences.
And to achieve that, you absolutely must follow the one-idea rule, which is the ultimate cure for the run-on sentence.
Oh, the dreaded run-on sentence. You see this all the time when learners try to mimic the speed of native speakers on paper. They end up writing things like, I went to the store and bought expensive milk, but it was bad because of inflation and I was tired, so I went home.
Right, you run out of breath just reading it.
Exactly.
It's grammatical chaos because there are just way too many moving parts.
Yeah.
The fix is to master the period. You break that tangled mess into single digestible ideas. I went to the store, I bought milk, it was expensive, I was tired. One idea, one sentence.
Okay, and to enforce this discipline, you can use a grammar checklist. Before you allow yourself to put a period at the end of a sentence and move on, you have to interrogate it. Is there a clear subject? Is there a verb? Is the tense consistent? Did I use a capital letter at the front and punctuation at the back?
It's just basic quality assurance. And another great laboratory exercise is the transformation drill. You take one of those simple sentences like, she plays tennis, and you actively manipulate its structure. Make it negative. She does not play tennis. Turn it into a question. Does she play tennis? Throw it into the past. Did she play tennis?
You're basically stress testing the structural integrity of the sentence. I love that. Okay, so we've covered how to listen, read, partner our vocabulary, speak, and write, which brings us to the climax of this entire deep dive. All of these individual skills funnel into one master blueprint.
The guide calls them the 4 pillars of A2 grammar. And the argument here is incredibly empowering. If you can master just these 4 pillars, you can successfully build 90% of the sentences you will ever need for daily life.
90%.
Yeah. You do not need to memorize every obscure grammar rule in the textbook. You just need these 4 load-bearing walls.
Okay, let's lay them out. Pillar number 1 we actually discussed earlier, the Golden Rule. SVO, subject, verb, object. You never hide the actor, and you never put the receiver before the action.
It's the foundation that everything else rests on. Pillar 2 is the tense trio. English has a lot of complex tenses, but you only really need 3 to survive and communicate effectively.
Present simple for routines and facts, present continuous for things happening right this second, and past simple for finished actions.
Exactly. Keep the timeline simple. Pillar 3 is a specific formula for asking questions, which they call the QASM formula, QUASM.
Okay, what does QASFM stand for?
It stands for question word, auxiliary, subject, main verb.
Let me try that. So if I want to ask someone about their hometown, where is the question word, do is the auxiliary, you is the subject, live is the main verb. Where do you live?
Spot on. And if you follow that QASM formula, your questions will be perfectly structured every single time. There's just 0 guesswork.
Incredible. And finally, pillar 4 is the negative shield.
Right. To express a negative, to say no or that something didn't happen, you need an auxiliary verb attached to the word not. Don't, doesn't, didn't, won't.
And there's a massive pitfall here that traps almost everyone, specifically when dealing with the past tense.
Oh, the infamous I didn't went mistake.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Why is it so incredibly common for learners to say I didn't went instead of I didn't go?
Well, because your brain is trying to be helpful. It knows you're talking about the past, so it instinctively wants to put that main action verb into the past tense. But what your brain forgets is that the auxiliary verb did is already in the past.
Ah, I see.
It already did the heavy lifting for you. So the main verb is protected by that shield. It has to stay in its pure base form. I didn't go is structurally sound. I didn't went is a double past, and the blueprint collapses.
The auxiliary absorbs the past tense so the main verb doesn't have to. I love that visualization. So how do we actually practice these 4 pillars? The guide provides an ultimate daily exercise called the Grammar Lab.
Yes, and it's a brilliant, low-friction daily habit. You pick just one basic verb, let's say play, and you force it through all 4 pillars out loud.
Okay, let's try this live. I'll take the verb play and run it through the lab. Pillar 1, SVO. I need an actor, the action, and a receiver. He plays football.
Perfect. Now push it through pillar 2, the tense trio.
Okay, present continuous. He is playing football right now. And past simple would be he played football yesterday.
Perfect. Now pillar 3, use the QASM formula to ask a question.
Right. Question word, auxiliary, subject, main verb. Okay, let me think. Where does he play football? And for the past, did he play football yesterday?
Spot on. And notice how play stayed in its base form because did took the past tense. Now finally, pillar 4, the negative shield.
Okay. He doesn't play football. And for the past, he didn't play football.
See, if you take just 2 minutes to do that exercise with one new verb every single morning, you are building an absolutely unbreakable grammatical foundation.
You are taking those loose, heavy bricks of vocabulary and permanently laying them down into a solid, reliable blueprint. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's look at the big picture. The core realization you should walk away with is that grammar is not a cage.
No, not at all.
It isn't an arbitrary list of academic rules designed to make you feel inadequate when you speak. Grammar is your toolkit. It's the blueprint that gives you the power to pull the exact thoughts out of your head and build them in the real world without confusion.
And, there's a beautiful, almost paradoxical irony to language learning that this guide highlights perfectly. We often resist strict grammar rules because they feel restrictive.
Yeah, we feel like they're holding us back from just speaking our minds freely.
But the reality is, strict rules are exactly what give you ultimate freedom.
How does submitting to rules give you freedom?
Well, consider the cognitive load we talked about earlier. If you have to spend all your mental energy actively figuring out where the subject goes, which tense to use, and whether you need an auxiliary verb every single time you open your mouth, you are exhausted.
Yeah, totally drained.
You have no brain power left for anything else.
Oh, but if you have automated these 4 pillars, if your brain knows the structural blueprint so well that it runs on autopilot, imagine how much mental energy you suddenly free up. The structure just takes care of itself.
Exactly. And when the structure takes care of itself, you finally have the bandwidth to showcase your actual personality. You can start focusing on your tone of voice, your sense of humor, your comedic timing, your empathy.
Wow.
By submitting to the rigid blueprint of the grammar, you remove the friction, which unlocks the freedom to be your authentic self in a completely new language.
You stop worrying about the walls falling down on top of you, and you finally get to start decorating the house. That is a phenomenal thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those builder's helmets on as you construct your English, one perfect brick at a time. Catch you next time.